Very good stuff on that. I went to the mall version.
President Arnold, we're ready.
Okay, there you go. Rebecca. It's time.
Oh, is it time? Okay.
It's time.
I was waiting for somebody to tell me. Welcome, everyone. Please join us for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Of the United States of America, to the republic for which liberty and justice.
Thank you for joining us today. Our first order of business will be to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed, nay. Motion passes. All right, the next item is the consent agenda. Items on the consent agenda are considered to be routine and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless a commissioner or citizen so requests, in which case the item will be removed from the consent agenda and placed on the regular agenda.
Madam President, I move approval of the consent agenda.
Second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed, nay. Motion passes. All right, on the regular agenda, we have one item. It's the Pioneer Creek Flex Tech. It's a request for a waiver of policy, and we'll begin with a presentation from staff.
Thank you, President Arnold, Commissioners. Good afternoon. For the record, Stacy Arrington, Development Services, and this is a decision briefing. This item is before you today as the applicant is requesting two waivers to the district street and right-of-way dedication policies for a design review application to construct two industrial flex-use warehouses, approximately 20 and 25,000 square feet in size. The project is estimated to average 78 daily trips with 9 in the PM peak hour. The project site is located west of Cull Road, south of Overland, and is just over 7 acres in size. The master street map designates that both Saturn Way and Targhee Street be extended as collector streets through the site, with Targhee Street being stubbed at the west property line and a east-west collector street, and Saturn Way at the north-south property line as a north-south collector street. District policy states that the developer is responsible for improving all collector street frontages adjacent to the site or internal to the development. And district half-street policy requires a new section of Saturn Way and Targhee Street be improved as half of a 36-foot street section, including vertical curb, gutter, and sidewalk, plus 12 feet of additional pavement widening beyond the center line, a 3-foot wide gravel shoulder, and a borrow ditch. District temporary dead-end street policy would also require a temporary turnaround at the terminus of the stub street. This site abuts the U.S. Postal Service processing facility to the east. When the USPS developed their site in 1998, they did not construct Saturn Way or dedicate the right-of-way as was required as part of that application. When the USPS then split their property to create the subject parcel of this application, which places all of the right-of-way dedication for the extension of Saturn Way on this site, as well as the Targhee, or the half-street portion of Targhee. Targhee Street is only 18 feet wide at the site's west property line, and there is not enough right-of-way to construct the street improvements and tie into the stub street to accommodate a two-way lane roadway. Also, when Targhee Street is constructed, the alignment will need to shift to the south to avoid the building located on the adjoining property to the north and is addressed on Saturn Way. This segment of Targhee Street is intended to provide connectivity to the neighborhood and is not necessary to serve this development. The applicant's letter indicates the applicant's reasons for the waiver from improving the southern portion of Saturn Way from the temporary turnaround to the south property line is requesting compensation for the right-of-way dedication for the eastern portion of the street, which would be the 12-foot portion, is because the southern portion of the street is not necessary to serve the site, and all of the right-of-way dedication falls on the site due to the USPS not signing the deed in 1998. The waiver request for improving Targhee Street is because the street cannot be constructed due to the right-of-way constraints, and the future intent of the roadway is to serve the existing roads to the west. And then the waiver from the right-of-way dedication without compensation is because the road is not necessary to serve the site, and additional right-of-way is required due to the constraints on the adjoining property. In summary, the development is estimated to generate less than 10 trips in the PM peak hour. The right-of-way dedication and street improvements were not completed or done by the USPS at the time that site was developed. There is insufficient right-of-way to improve Targhee Street as a two-way roadway, and due to the constraints on the adjoining property, additional right-of-way is required for the future alignment and construction of that street, and Targhee Street is not necessary to serve the site. Staff is recommending approval of the staff report as written, and I would stand for any questions.
Thank you. Are there questions?
I have a question.
Yes,
Thank
Commissioner
you.
Baker.
So will there ever be right-of-way to improve Targhee Street from any other property?
If the adjoining property to the north does develop in the future, the corner that would complete that 18 feet section would be done, and then the applicant, the rest, and there is a sufficient room for it to complete where the right-of-way would shift to the south, yes. But it would happen with that adjoining property to the north when and if it developed, which is why we're just recommending right-of-way at this time.
Okay, then I don't
Wiring of
understand,
right-of-way.
I don't understand the request for compensation. What is that all about?
We have a rough proportionality, and this property is required to develop and dedicate right-of-way for almost 2 collector streets. This is
Okay,
generating only 9 trips in the PM peak
And I'm
hour.
only
So
talking
we're
about
adjoining-
Targhee Street.
And Targhee Street, again, it's not necessary to serve the site, but it is in the master street map to provide neighborhood connectivity.
Right. So could you put that slide up back then that talked about compensation? Improvements and So the applicant wants compensation for the eastern half of? No, I'm sorry.
No, they're requesting the compensation for Targhee because they would have to dedicate the majority of the portion of the right-of-way because of it having to shift to not go through the building. Compensation would be, we would have to potentially buy the building on the north side if we were to try and have them just contribute their portion of the right-of-way and the half street. And we do typically, there are a number of occasions when we have compensated in these type of instances in order to get roads constructed.
And there's no way it could be a one-way street only? Like a one-way? I'm just concerned about the fact that there's not going to be connectivity for the neighborhood. I mean, we talk about it all the time, and yet we run up against a situation like this and we just throw it out the window. So, I mean, is there any way currently of creating some connectivity for the neighborhood?
President Baker, Commissioner Baker, there is connectivity still through the neighborhood on the west side. Again, this is a desirable connection. It's not a necessary connection at this time. It doesn't mean that it will not happen, again, when the property develops to the north. So we are trying to preserve for that future connectivity.
Okay, thank you.
Do we need some clarification from our legal counsel as to what we can require and whether we're required to pay compensation?
I would like to hear from council.
Okay. Because I agree with Commissioner Baker, it makes sense to deal with this now and have the connectivity. So maybe Mr. Price can help us out.
Madam President, Commissioner Steve Price, ACHD General Counsel. I've worked with the Development Services staff on this particular application. One of the concerns is that the intended use for the property has minimal impact on ACHD road system. And per our policy, we would be exacting significant improvements with any other developer that had additional impacts. As you know, under the U.S. and Idaho Constitution, that we can only exact improvements to mitigate in rough proportionality, as Stacy had indicated, to mitigate the impacts of the proposed development on our road system. We looked at this, we worked, our development service staff worked closely with the applicant, and we felt in concert with them that this was a fair request. We can't exact any additional improvements than what is before this application. And to my understanding that the applicant has agreed to this. So the development service staff had agreed that, and I agree, and that is that we would have to provide compensation for certain parts of the rights of way if we wanted to preserve this, which is in accordance with our master street map. Is that helpful?
Okay. Anything further for staff at this point?
Yeah, I have a
Commissioner Hanson?
Yeah, actually, I wanted to ask Stacy some questions, if I could. Stacy, this is great, good report. I understand the dilemma we're in. What is the timing of the completion of the collector road, both Saturn and Targhee, estimated timing, so we know roughly when that would be completed? By obviously the money, part of which would come from the developer, and part of which come from us.
Correct, Commissioner Hanson. It would depend again on Saturn Way, because there is a undeveloped site south of the property.
Right.
If we go to so it would be, the completion of that would be kind of driven with the development of that southern portion. As to Targhee, again, if I can use the arrows here and just clarify a little bit. There is this portion of Targhee that is obviously outside of the applicant's control and is owned by the adjoining northern property. So again, at the time that potentially if that property were to develop, we would work in conjunction with that property owner that he would finish his small portion along that edge to the property to where the road would jog to the south, and we would work with them to complete that construction.
Yep. Was there discussion on whether in the interim, because it now depends really on other people's timetables, whether and when they develop, to provide connectivity for automobiles? There's significant residences, it appears, to the west and to the south of Victory, and there's a significant attraction, which is Edwards development, to the northeast, which I assume, I'm just based on the record and what's in front of me, that those folks drive the quarter mile or half mile because there isn't the connectivity through this property. Whether there could be sooner pedestrian and bicycle connectivity to Saturn and to Targhee, so those residences wouldn't have to drive. They could actually go safely there instead of walking or trying to cycle on Cole or Victory. Was there any discussion of that? It seems to me that's part of our complete streets, complete network, and that piece might have been a piece where the developer would be fine to do that, at least within the property that they owned.
Pardon me, Commissioner Hanson. There is a park area further to the north, and there is actually, and it's hard to see on this map. I thought I'd had a better view of one, and I apologize. Yeah, as Mr. Insman is pointing out, there is a lot of connectivity already here to the west that they can get over to the development without having to go like all the way up to Overland and stuff. And again, I apologize. I should have had a larger aerial map. But there was some discussion whether a pedestrian access could be provided along where Targhee would be. It was a question of sidewalk to not really, The placement of the sidewalk, which could, be done in 5 years or something, it was just, it did not seem feasible at the time. We are having them extend the sidewalk all the way down to the south property line, however, to hopefully further some connection along there since there's nothing to the south.
Right, right. Thank you. Of course, over 5 years in an asphalt path, just like the Greenbelt, and it's in many other places, functions perfectly well, and oftentimes that's about the lifespan before you have to re-asphalt it and wouldn't need to do concrete sidewalks. But it seems to me that there's some real obvious, the value of these collector roads, and I realize we can't use this developer's or any developer's impact fees to make these improvements in advance of those other properties developing, so we have to use general funds. But in the meantime, there's a real, seems to me, an obvious connectivity that we could have made, at least as to the property owners, that we're looking towards that final connection in the middle of the section.
Understand.
Thanks. Is the developer going to speak, or is this it?
Before we get to that, Madam Chairman,
Yes, go ahead.
so you said there's connectivity to the north that we're just not seeing on this map?
That is correct.
Okay, and then also, could you put up the plat? Okay, thank you.
All right, further questions for staff? Actually, I do have one question, and perhaps I just missed it in here, but you're recommending that we approve this and provide compensation for the right-of-way dedication. I didn't see the amount in here.
It would be the same as any other negotiation with our right-of-way. We don't typically have that amount to begin with. We do work with the applicant and get the appraisals and the sales estimates, et cetera, to provide that cost, and it is done usually at the time that we're reviewing the improvements.
Well,
I do
guess
have
I'm not
some
comfortable
estimated
approving this
costs
with
for
a blank
what-
check without knowing what the amount is that if we're saying we're going to compensate them for the right-of-way, I'm not comfortable with approving it with a blank check.
Madam President, Steve Price again, for the record. You're not giving us a blank check. What you're doing is you give us authority to work with the applicant, negotiate an agreement. We typically don't do that until we actually have the application in place. And then we would come to you and we would notify you of that. And I can assure you that we will negotiate, well, fairly, but we will negotiate for the best interests of ACHD's taxpayers.
Well, and I absolutely believe that we should pay just compensation anytime we take public property. But if we don't know the amount ahead of time, then I think we have to condition this approval on reaching agreement. And if we cannot, then the approval is going to be null and void. That would be my position.
And that is
Okay,
that's what's going on, so.
okay.
Yeah.
Just want to make that clear. All right, we'll now hear from the applicant. If you would, please state your name and address for the record.
Good afternoon, everyone. Scott Thompson, 27 West Ardean Street. Thank you for your time today. Quickly, and then answer. About that. Purchased the land as surplus, and no agency over local. Dedication or future and county requirement. Therefore, when we came, there were a number of late issues to be addressed. In this case, Boise. If the strictest percent of the site would be, and the resulting cost well above our price of the entire site. And the city of Boise As it relates to target, applicant requests Target cannot be built at this time due to the west. As it relates to south, applicant requests a street policy to construct the southern to the southern property line, as it is not necessary to serve the sites or the adjacent property to the south. Conclusion. We believe the solution to by ACH staff, the city of Boise, and applicant properly reflects the interests of each party, the public, and the future preservation of the connectivity of Targhee and Saturn Way. While applicant is still dedicating approximately 3/4 of an acre, about 10% of the parcel without compensation, and will be responsible for the construction of approximately 400 feet of lineal half street of Saturn Way. Applicant believes this is a proportional solution to the development of a parcel previously owned by an agency of the federal government. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there questions for the applicant?
Yes, I have a question, which you heard me. Of course, connectivity to the site is fine, but it's our connectivity policies, our complete streets policies, it's about connectivity through various sites to make sure that there's connections, and I recognize there's limitations to building out the roadways, but has there been some discussion, or is there interest in at least making the connectivity for pedestrian and bicyclists through the property on an asphalt path or whatnot, simply because of the geography of where this is located?
So we do have in ACHD's staff proposal or report, which we have agreed to. We would actually be building the sidewalk all the way through Saturn Way, all the way from the north to the south property line.
That's past your little roundabout there.
Yes,
Okay,
it's
yeah.
all the way to the south property line.
So then we just have that gap on the neighboring property for Saturn.
Well, Saturn, the gap, that would be more in reference to Targhee Street. So we don't have anything contemplated as to improvements for Targhee Street. I think the question of alignment is a significant one, but the sidewalk for Saturn goes all the way through the site.
All right.
Okay, any further questions for the applicant? No? We have had a couple of people who signed in and indicated they wanted to testify on this item. So I'll call your names, and then if there's anyone else, we'll give you an opportunity at the end. The first one is Josh Pipkin. And if you would, please state your name and address for the record.
Josh Pipkin, 7801 West Lemhi, Boise, Idaho. So, I just like to say, like, back there on Targhee, it needs to go through and shift on that property if it doesn't be a full street, because people dump trash in that corner back there on the north property where it does that roundabout. And if you put in a half street, it's gonna be like the one out in front where Lemhi and Saturn Way meet. That there's trucking in that blank field on the north side of our property where that green field is right there. There's a trucking company now there. And there's a lot of trucks that come up and down and turn. And there's always trucks on the street. So it needs to be a full street developed because it gets jammed up. And that Costco is like the third busiest Costco in the nation. So everybody comes down that to try to beat traffic going down Overland, or they'll cut through now. And then where Chicago Connections is on the corner, right there, there's a pine tree and you can't see, and there's like multiple wrecks all the time that I don't know if you guys know about, but it's a pretty congested area compared to what they're saying. There's only 10 cars, and if they're putting a trucking company right there, it's going to be pretty bad. So just wanted to say that.
Okay, are there any questions?
Well, I have a question, since you live on the west side
Yeah.
and you walk to I assume do you walk to Edwards, it's just like right there?
From there,
Yeah.
I walk.
Okay,
But I mean, you don't, from Matheson, just put in their sidewalk on the, I guess it'd be on the west side of the street, but there's not a sidewalk on the other side, and there's always cars just ripping around like 30, 40 mile an hour, and there's always a head on about every 2 weeks right there, so.
so there's not a dedicated pedestrian facility to walk to
And then right
Edwards?
in front of our property, after you guys bought that piece that goes in front of the property and it dead ends,
Mhm.
there's no sidewalk on either side of that. It's just a half street, and people drive there in the middle of the night and they'll dump trash, and then I gotta go out there and pick it up. So, I mean, it's just, I don't think putting in a half street there or not developing it all the way or back on Targhee is a smart idea. Cause it's just a place where somebody drop trash or people get hurt. If it's a one-way street, somebody walking down in the middle of the night or a kid, there's 2 houses up on the Targhee side in that back neighborhood. There's a little preschool daycare thing, and there's always kids kind of out there, and there's kids around that neighborhood, and they're always walking. And if you put in Targhee, and we don't put in there's not a stop sign back there, so cars are gonna fly down there to try to make it to Edward to cut traffic, because Cole's so congested. One of those kids is gonna get hit.
Yeah.
So.
Thank
Okay,
you.
I'm not sure those are issues that we can solve today, but I would ask that someone on our staff talk with you at the end of the meeting.
Yeah.
So you can explain your concerns to them and we can take a look at that.
Okay.
All right, thank
So-
you.
Madam
Go
President,
ahead.
thank you for testifying. So, are you in favor of putting a half street through
No.
Targhee? No.
No.
Are you in favor of putting a walking path there?
No.
So you don't want anything to happen on the Targhee
Not
segment
unless
on the
it's
north of this
a full
property?
street through that's fully developed,
Okay.
because it's gonna end up being trash,
Okay.
either on their property or our property. People throw stuff like on that corner, they throw bottles and trash gets thrown over the fence, even Matheson's, and
Okay.
they're cleaning it up. So it's just kind of, it's just gonna add to more, if it's just a little walking path, somebody could get killed back there for, it's not the greatest neighborhood. So, I just wanted to bring that up.
Thank you.
All right.
All right, thank you. All right, the next person who signed in is Trina Woods. Please state your name and address for the record.
Trina Woods, and I live at 7801 Lenny as well. And I'm actually the caretaker for the current owner of that property. I have a business in front, and I live on the property at night. My concern is, one, the Targhee Street. There are a lot of children that do play there. That is a pretty busy neighborhood, and I think increasing any traffic down that street, would certainly have devastating results. It is a neighborhood. And with regards to the Saturn Way, I also agree with Josh. I've watched many accidents on Saturn Way. I think increasing traffic down Saturn Way without taking care of that street and reducing the dangers is a mistake. I personally have, tried to pull out before and almost been hit by the traffic that comes from that really heavy Costco traffic. There's 2 hotels there. There's countless restaurants, and people use that street to avoid all the congestion up around the freeway. So I think that all needs to be addressed.
Are there questions for her? No? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next person is Shane, and I can't read the last name. Okay. You don't have any additional comments? Okay, thank you. The next person is Dale Pipkin.
Good afternoon, Commissioners.
Please state your name and
Dale
address.
Pipkin, 7801 Lemhi. I'm the owner of the property to the north that everybody talks about continually. So, long time ago, I put in Saturn. I was the developer of part of the Edwards Cinemas complex with Robert Drake. We developed the road from Spectrum Way all the way to my current property. When Costco was put in, I agreed and allowed the connection on Saturn to come down in front of the property to the north of me, which I sold to Matheson, and the property that I own now, which is the RV storage yard and a commercial business. When Costco went in, I made an agreement with the ACHD to, again, help out with being a good neighbor and having connectivity, because we really need that for our highways and roads here in Ada County. So I allowed the connection of Lemhi to be constructed in the front of my parking lot. I gave up more than half of my parking lot for the extension of Saturn, with the means that Saturn would be improved to a full street when the property to the south of me was developed, which is what Strider Group is trying to do. So I gave up a street and a half for future development that wasn't required of me, but I knew that Saturn someday was gonna go on down to Victory. So Saturn itself, there's 2 trucking companies, machine shop, drywall business, metal manufacturing company, they're all in my building. In the cul-de-sac, you have multiple businesses, multiple tenants, trucking companies, Air Rock Supply, Stinker gas stations. Everybody uses that cul-de-sac in Saturn extensively, not to go out on Cole because of the traffic. They go up and down Saturn. So Saturn in the front of Lemhi, that should be improved. If they're gonna be putting 2 big buildings down there with a, I don't know if you've seen their building, but it's all dock wall. And dock wall means trucks. I don't believe with the staff's report, I've talked to them, 10 trips a day is ridiculous. I have 50 trips a day with one of my tenants. And so 10 trips for a trucking company, or 2 buildings with full dock high walls is gonna be full of trucks. And they're all gonna be on Saturn. And you can't get all that traffic on the half a lane that ACHD put in front of my building when we made the agreement for the Lemhi connection. The agreement was always Saturn to be developed the rest of the way when the property develops to the south. So that's issue number 1. Issue number 2 is I have talked many times, many emails with Strider, with Aaron, the vice president of Strider Group. I've told them that as a business owner, and I've been there since 1997, I am for the Targhee Street extension to get it done. We have plenty of roads that are unfinished in Idaho, in Boise especially. I told them and sent them a map and drawings, and I actually have a flash drive in my pocket that I could share with everybody that shows how I would allow them to purchase the property from me to get Targhee to bend in as fast as it could to the south and run all the way down the fence line. They're developing, not me. So it's up to them to have the expense of the development of the road for their property. And I understand they keep saying I'm blocking them. I am not blocking them. I've told them a million times, I will allow you to come through my property to extend Targhee, because as my son said and everybody else, it's a dumping ground. We spend thousands of dollars picking up trash because it's a dead-end street. That temporary turnaround that was put in by me when I built the building for ACHD, for the fire trucks to turn around and trash trucks to turn around and everybody else to turn around and dump mattresses and couches and everything else down there. And then you got all those kids that are running down the sidewalks and, because it's a great place to build forts. And I mean, I would have when I was a kid, but it needs to have connectivity. And you're right. And I've always made concession when I've developed other properties and when I developed this property to make the concession for the public. That's part of developing. You are development driven to put in the streets. At the same time, ACHD has a responsibility to me to lessen the burden as much as possible, because I'm not developing, they are. But I'm willing to give up some property so they can bring Targhee through. They'll sit there and deny that, oh no, he's blocking me. I'm not blocking them. I'm all for it. come on through my property, but it needs to be the minimal amount. I talked with the right-of-way person here at ACHD, I can't remember their name, and they agreed that we can take the street and turn it to the south within 60 feet. It'll be the less amount of impact to my property and allow Targi to go through. It also is a cost saving to ACHD in the future or Strider because there's 4 telephone poles. And I had an estimate from Idaho Power, it's $80,000 to move those telephone poles. If they shift the street to the south just a little bit, the fence can stay there, the telephone poles can stay there, my building can stay there, and the street is in on Targi. So there is a way to get it through there, and I'm willing to participate with it, but for some reason, they don't want to bring any of that forward. So I'm for bringing the street through, I'm for the connectivity, I'm for the safety of the kids, and I'm for people quit dumping couches on my property. If that street doesn't get developed back there, we're gonna have another street that is sitting there doing nothing, and ACHD is gonna be on the hook. Not only to pay for it, but now you guys are paying them property for the property. So, am I gonna get paid for my property that I'm losing? If I develop down the road? I was told by your planner, if I develop, because I thought about putting some canopies back there, that I have to put in the street on half of my property and lose 40 feet down my fence line, which if you look at a real picture of that, that's a very old picture that you have up there. My yard is full. I mean, I make my living on RV storage, just like, you see how many storages are popping up around the valley. I've been there since 97 with storage. So I can't afford to have a street come through my property because we're not developing. And I mean, it doesn't make any sense that we would say, oh, let's put the burden on Dale because we're developing. We'll make sure that he has to pay something down the road. I mean, they're developing, they need to put in the street. I'm not blocking them. I'm going to work with ACHD to get the street through my property as quickly as we can and turn it to the south safely. So, here's some more. So the amount of traffic that's coming down Costco and off of Lamhi, it needs to be diverted also down Targi. A lot of those people that are coming down Lamhi are trying to get into the Maple Grove neighborhoods, but they can't get through. So they go north they race down Statter, they go up around Spectrum, and then they race down Ash Park, which is on the back of my property. And, they do that big loop right there. So, I think there's a way that Targi can get worked out where it's minimally invasive to my property and my operation I have going on, and Strider or ACHD can work together to get the street to come by there and go through. Whether or not you are making them put in the street, that's one thing. I think the street should go in. I think the sidewalks should go in for the pedestrian traffic. They walk through that field constantly. I mean, every weekend there's hundreds of people that walk through the fence and they walk down the side of my fence and they get out there on Saturn, which has no sidewalk, and they walk down there and we got those cars. Can't tell you how many head-on accidents happen at the intersection of Lamhi and Saturn because there's no stop sign. Nobody knows if it's a T intersection. There's no line. There's no stop sign on Lamhi. Nobody knows what's going on, so they come flying down the street at 90 mile an hour and try to make that sharp left-hand turn, and I can't tell you how many wrecks there are in the wintertime there because of the snow and ice. So that needs to be a corridor constructed through that area right there.
Okay, thank you. Could we have staff respond to his concerns? First, the traffic count, the trip count of only 9 trips per day. Can you address that? And then can you address the issues he's raised regarding connecting Targi?
I can. Thank you, Madam President. The staff report mentioned 9 vehicle trips per day in the PM peak hour. That wasn't the daily vehicle estimate. So the PM peak hour is the highest. It's between 4 and 6 p.m. It's not a full day count. I do appreciate all of Mr. Pipkin's comments, and I kind of want to address them. With regard to Saturn Way between the property line and Limb High, Mr. Inselman actually worked with Mr. Pipkin back in the day when we purchased the right-of-way from him to get Saturn extended. And with this development application, we will work to make sure that we get the appropriate sidewalk connections up to Limb High so that we don't have missing segments. So we'll ACHD will work with the applicant to make sure we're satisfied with the connectivity on Saturn. With regard to Targhee Street and a little bit of history, just like all sites that come before us, if someone calls and said, what am I going to be required to do when I develop my property, everybody's given the same piece of information as Mr. Strider was. Mr. Strider requested a waiver because he does have a development application in front of us. If Mr. Pipkin wants to work with us and we can acquire his right-of-way now separate from the development application, just like we're working with the developer, we're happy to do that with you. But with regard to the construction of Targhee Street, this is a project that would need to come through the 5-year work plan. We would certainly need to have neighborhood outreach. I mean, we're talking about a neighborhood and a very auto-oriented commercial district. So before we construct that connection of Targhee, we would definitely, this would be an ACHD project with a lot of public outreach. But like I said, if Mr. Pipkin wants the highway district to obtain the right-of-way needed for that extension there at the southwest corner of his property, prior to any development, we're happy to work with you.
Yeah, I think it's important that the connectivity of those streets is done now, because all we gotta do is drive around Boise and see all the streets that are half done, Cloverdale, Eagle, Maple Grove, whatever street it is, there's a lot of half streets that are done. So, one of my concerns that I had, because I am a builder developer, is that if I did go and develop on that property and I give ACHD the connectivity to get the road onto Saturn or onto Targhee, and all of Targhee is on the right-of-way or Strider Group's property, if I do anything back there, I'm gonna have the burden of having to put in a half a street, which is,
I would suggest that you meet with Christy Little and have the discussion about getting the right-of-way dedication done. And then I think it would be appropriate for staff to start the conversation, the public outreach, and take a look at the process for getting Targhee connected. But that's going to be something that has to be separate and apart from this application. Okay, thank you.
well, just so you know, I'm willing to participate.
Great, we appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, the next person who's signed in looks like Scott Thompson. Oh, okay. And then Leon Kearns. Please state your name and address for the record.
Leon Kearns, 7801 Lemhi. I'm a business owner renting a space there at the property to the north. And so I'm very well aware of the cul-de-sac there, the turnaround in front of Dell's property there. It's very unsafe. Something does need to happen with that. I would agree with that. But the most important part, I just want to get up and speak to the fact, just the burden that Dell's had since he's owned this property, of giving property to the ACHD for development purposes of roads or access or whatever. And then now that the developers purchased the property to the south, and they're trying to push more burden on top of Dell. And I'm just here to, kind of voice my opinion on that, because when the developer looked at the property, as well as Dell and I looked at the property before this outfit purchased it, and we knew that that the development needed to happen, the road needed, the access needed to come through, so that was part of the cost of maybe possibly negotiating that. So I'm sure these folks also negotiated that to the cost of their property, and they knew that they had to, without any regard to taking half of Dell's property or having him move his building or whatever might need to happen. So I just find it kind of imposing on Dell to expect him to get more property when these folks knew that when they purchased it, they had put a road in, they'd had the design around it. And especially that, you know, they stated themselves that this was surplus land. So I mean, that connotates just itself that they got a discount on it. To me, it doesn't make any sense to preserve the existing property. You know, it's a substantial impact on Dell. You know what I mean? He has to give up more, 40 feet, 20 feet, I'm not sure. But he does utilize every inch of that property to generate an income. You know what I mean? He has a full-time job working for somebody else, and this is something that he uses for passive income. Put yourself in issues. How would you guys like this if somebody purchased some property next door to you and they're going to take half of your property or 20 feet of your property because they don't want to spend the money or give up 20 feet of their land that they obviously have they have a lot of property that they can do that with. And they knew that when they purchased it. So to impose that onto Dell is just, to me, just very unfair. I feel this would be a substantial impact to Dell Pipkin. That's all I have to say.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions for him? No? All right, thank you very much. That's the extent of those who indicated they wanted to speak to this item. Is there anyone else who would like to address this item today? Seeing no volunteers, I'll let the applicant come back up for rebuttal comments.
Just a few.
State your name and address for the record again.
Scott Thompson, 8727 West Ardeen Street. Just a few quick comments. First of all, I think a number of the statements made and concerns expressed really deal with issues extraneous to this particular property, really beyond the scope of this particular application. I would like to highlight a couple things in sort of specific rebuttals. One is our application has no specific impact on Mr. Pipkin's property. In fact, we have already made extensive sort of adjustments to the original application based upon actually moving Targhee south and almost completely avoiding his property, except to the extent that you might have some angle requirements or degree requirements in how to turn a road, and then that small corner that is actually adjacent or connected to our property. That would be one specific comment. Another specific comment is, this is not a trucking facility. We have 2 dock-high doors per building currently planned. These are spec buildings, meaning we have no tenants in mind. Trucking companies do not want this location per se, and that's just simply not enough dock doors. This is an industrial flex tech building with only an 18 clear. Having 2 dock doors on a 25,000 square foot building is not a wall of docks. But again, I think our proposal and application, actively represents avoiding Mr. Pipkin's property to the extent possible. Thank you.
Madam President, I just have one
Yes.
question, sir. We understand the history with the Postal Service and how that all fell off the radar. But at the time you purchased this property, were you aware of the obligation for the connectivity?
Was aware of the desire for connectivity, yes.
And that was, what was your understanding then when you purchased the property
That
in
it's
relation
eventually.
to it? It was an option or?
Well, there wasn't anything in particular. There was no dedication, there was no right-of-way. But I knew that all of the agencies were interested in those particular connectivities, yes.
Thank you.
Anything further? All right, does staff, do you have any further comments on this item?
I have a question for staff, just to
All right, Commissioner
some
Hanson?
of the questions that have been raised. So, Stacy, a number of questions have been raised that are beyond our jurisdiction with health and safety, and of course, that's intimately connected to our master street map and our obligations under these connections, which obviously some people perceive as optional and others may perceive as it's going to happen. Where are we with the general purpose government? This is in the city of Boise, right? So have they addressed these? Have some of these issues come up? Are they coming up later? Because it seems like there's quite a number of things that need to be resolved that we can't resolve. We don't have the jurisdiction to do that. Where are we with the city of Boise?
Commissioner Hanson, I believe they were waiting for us to act. We had given them the notice of the public hearing date, so I believe they were waiting for us to act before they act on their application with the city. Is that correct? But they are in agreement with our report, yes, as far as our requirements. Does that answer your question?
It tells me where we are with the city of Boise. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, any further questions for staff? If not, commissioners, you have this before you for action.
Well, Madam Chair, I would move to defer this action indefinitely. I don't want to put a set date on it. I would defer this action. And if I get a second, I'll explain why.
Madam President.
What would be
maybe-
your reason for deferring it?
Oh, okay. Well, there's clearly a lot of issues. These issues have come up on a number of occasions where the final properties to be developed are those in the middle of the section. There's really big issues of connectivity, even interim connectivity, safe connectivity for pedestrians. This is a conjunction between an industrial, commercial, and residential area. There's issues of health and safety and lighting and issues that we can't deal with, but are very important and ought to be as part of the discussion as to whether and how there's access to this particular property that we do have jurisdiction over. And so I think we're unique, and we can't deal with them, but signing off on them does not mean that we agree that this is a good situation. So I think these have to be resolved by the city. This is a clear case where the general purpose government needs to address these concerns and perhaps initiate some process to address those concerns in their own budget or zoning or whatever before this agency acts on the whole access and transportation aspects. So that's why I would defer this.
All right, is there a second to the motion?
Yes.
Okay, it's seconded. I'm going to ask our legal counsel whether we should defer this indefinitely or if we should tie it to having it come back to us after the city of Boise has acted, or what would be your recommendation, Mr. Price?
Madam President, Commissioners, the application is before us. We have a set process of acting on a land use application. This is a land use application, and we follow that process. We review it in accordance with our policy. If the commission has any concerns specific to the development application, they can make those as conditions. I urge you to act on the application and provide findings of fact. We've gone through this. We have some commissioners that wish and continue to hope that the land use agencies will act before us. But that is something that needs to be worked out between the land use agency and ACHD. It isn't anything that we have a process in place to accommodate. This application, it deserves the application of the law in Idaho, and ACHD is one piece of a land use application. We are only to comment on, and our decision has to be based upon solely the transportation components. We can't make decisions or hold an application hostage because we want some other aspects of that which the general purpose government should do. The question is, does it meet our policy? And the commission is supposed to act within those limitations.
Okay, is there a substitute motion someone would like to make?
Madam President, I'm not going to make a motion because I'm kind of flummoxed by this whole thing. I don't think we should defer it indefinitely, but I also don't know if I can make a decision today. They're asking for a waiver of policy. And I'm not sure I'm prepared to waive that policy on the connectivity. I also am very, I really don't like the fact that we'll discuss the compensation, after the fact. That we approve the application and then say, okay, and by the way, now we'll talk about compensation. I think that kind of needs to be nailed down ahead of time. I know maybe we don't do that as a matter of course, but I think in this case, I think there's good reason to do that. So I just, maybe deferring it for a couple of weeks would work. I don't know.
Would you like to make a motion to defer it for, say, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, in order to get some of these questions answered and deal with the compensation issue?
All right, I'll make the motion to defer this for 3 weeks because I think work expands to the time allowed. So if we don't allow too much time, it'll concentrate the mind. I'll defer it for 3 weeks, the questions of compensation, to discuss to narrow down the questions of compensation and also to narrow down the alignment of Targhee and perhaps how it can be accelerated in terms of actually constructing it.
So you need more information before you can waive the policy. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right. Is there further discussion on the substitute motion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the substitute motion to defer this item for 3 weeks, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, nay? Motion passes. All right, that concludes our regular agenda with the exception of public communications. Is there anyone who would like to address the commission in public communications? Seeing no volunteers, meeting adjourned. Thank you for being here.